China has set a goal to build the country into a moderately prosperous society by 2020. The central government identified financial risks, poverty alleviation, and environmental pollution as the biggest challenges to overcome to reach the goal. They call these the three tough battles. President Xi Jinping said for financial risks, one of the major areas of focus for the financial sector should be systematic risks. Chen Yulu, a CPPCC member and deputy governor of the People's Bank of China, spoke about one risk, macro leveraging ratio. That's a ratio of a country's outstanding liabilities to its GDP. Chen says if the ratio is too high or the ratio grows too quickly, it could trigger systematic financial risks. He spoke about how this can be prevented.
It needs efforts from both the finance sector and the real economy. On the one side, we need to build a multi-level, normative, transparent, open, viable, and flexible capital market. On the other side, we need to get rid of debt, production capacity, and zombie companies. We need to support the new economy, the new industry, and the new model to realize a high-quality development of China's economy.
Air pollution was the next major topic. CPPCC member Liu Bingjiang, who's also a senior official with the Chinese Ministry of Ecology and Environment, says the country has made major progress in tackling this issue. He says the country got rid of 13,000 industrial furnaces. He also says it was the first time coal consumption dropped below 60% of overall primary energy sources.
These measures have effectively helped to continuously improve the country's air quality. PM 2.5 concentration continues to decline, and the number of days of high-quality air has been increasing.
And finally, China's plan to eradicate poverty by next year. 16.6 million people in rural areas still live in poverty, and illnesses plague just 40% of them. So one area highlighted at the conference was providing good medical services as means to lift people from poverty.
We need to make medical services affordable and ensure they have access to medical services. Also, we need to decrease the occurrence of illnesses.
Chinese Premier Li Keqiang listed fighting the three tough battles as one of the key tasks this year in his government work report. To reduce poverty, he urges governments to deeply facilitate targeted poverty alleviation, devote more capital, and improve those poor areas' abilities of self-development. Wang Hui, CGTN, Beijing.
Tuesday's opening session of the National People's Congress saw Chinese Premier Li Keqiang set out several measures in the government's annual work report. Most are aimed at revitalizing growth in China's private sector. On Wednesday, CPPCC delegates from the private sector also highlighted their proposals for the coming year. CGTN's Uche Okoronkwa with more on the story.
China's private sector is a critical part of its economy. It accounts for about 50% of the nation's tax revenue and 60% of its GDP. But in the last few years, a credit crunch, a property downturn, and trade friction with the US have dealt a blow to their bottom lines. In the manufacturing sector, profits shrunk between 8% and 14% last year.
Now, it is evident that the government's focus this year is on lightening the burden on private sector businesses. Their strategy will be to reduce taxes and social contributions, especially for the manufacturing sector, as well as small and medium enterprises. Now, the NPC says it will also ensure more access to affordable financing through reforms in monetary and credit policy. And most important for foreign investors, it will be relaxing controls on market access and bringing down transaction costs.
As generous as this seems, will it be enough to revive capital spending and investment amongst private sector firms?
Businesses cannot just rely on tax cuts. They should focus on innovation and exploring the market.
The government did get a nod from the private sector on its plans to promote high-quality innovation and business startups by improving collaboration between enterprises, academia, and research institutions.
Governments can also build a platform for businesses and research institutions, such as universities, to share technology, so that businesses can have access to the latest technologies.
But as China's private firms look to the government to improve the environment at home, African nations are looking more and more to China's private sector to play a greater role in their economies. Already, Chinese private investment in Africa stands at over $60 billion.
I hope African governments can improve the business environment by lowering trade barriers and offering preferential tax policies. I also hope African governments can ensure the continuity of policies towards foreign investment.
It may be an uphill battle for China's private businesses this year, and some seem worried. But analysts say that policy-driven credit support may be the answer to a full recovery. Uche Okoronkwo, CGTN, Beijing, China.
Moving on to other news now. Kenya's transport minister has criticised striking workers at the country's main international airport in Nairobi. Flights were grounded due to a protest over a labour dispute affecting 3 airports in the country. Well, officials have now appointed a team to mediate and to help resolve the dispute. CGTN's Daniel Arap-Moy reports.
A strike by the Kenyan Aviation Workers Union caused a major crisis at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, leaving hundreds of thousands of travelers stranded. The strike follows a labor dispute over contracts and job security between the Kenya Aviation Workers Union and Kenya Airways. Hundreds of passengers got stranded at the airport after their flights were delayed or rescheduled, with many expressing frustration.
Most of us are not notified on the delays and any inconveniences that are coming up. And we also have inconveniences because if we are connecting on the other side, we are deemed to miss the flights.
I started from Mombasa this morning, 2 o'clock. I was supposed to connect going to London. And what I see is this one. When I arrived in Nairobi, I'm supposed to leave by now. I don't know what's going to happen next minute.
The striking Kenya aviation workers who downed their tools are unhappy with what they say is unfair staff hiring and compensation by management, including the proposed takeover of the country's biggest international business hub by Kenya Airways. The strike also drew sharp criticism from the country's transport secretary.
Not interfere with a security installation, especially when you have no basis for complaints. When you have a job, nobody has failed to pay your salary. Nobody has given you a threat that your job you'll be at risk, and yet you go on a strike. You have been given assurances that the numbers are going up in terms of employment, and you still go on strike. That is called malice. It is called sabotage. It is called economic sabotage. It is something which cannot be tolerated. It is criminal activity, and that's why you found the security agencies are here. They managed to chase away everybody who was bringing trouble.
Jomo Kenyatta International Airport is Kenya's largest aviation facility and the busiest airport in East Africa. Its importance as an aviation center makes it the pace setter for both domestic and international travelers. By press time, all operations had been returned to normalcy, including flights to different destinations. Daniel Arap-Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
The decision by US President Donald Trump to extend sanctions on Zimbabwe by another year has been described as despicable, contemptible and a travesty of justice. 141 entities and individuals, including former President Robert Mugabe and current leader Emmerson Mnangagwa, are on a US sanctions list. CGTN's Farai Wakatuya reports.
According to President Donald Trump, the Zimbabwean government presents an unusual and extraordinary threat to US foreign policy. An absurd claim, according to Zimbabwe, which says it's done its best to re-engage all nations it had fallen out with since the advent of the new dispensation. In a statement issued Tuesday, Permanent Secretary for Information Nick Mangwana said, We have embarked on a policy of rapprochement with the United States and would naturally expect to witness a shift in US foreign policy on Zimbabwe as the logical dividend. But the United States has opted to renew the punitive measures to press for changes to laws that restrict media and protests. Demonstrations over a fuel price increase in January were met by a violent crackdown, during which allegations of abuse were leveled against the army. Zimbabwe has promised to investigate the allegations. It claims significant progress in implementing other reforms and holding a free and fair election in July 2018.
The country has witnessed the upholding of human rights fundamentals and the liberalization of the media and many other freedoms as enshrined in our national constitution.
Despite targeting ZANU-PF-linked entities and individuals, the sanctions imposed in 2001 have impacted ordinary citizens.
International payments destined for Zimbabwe have been frozen, social programs have been scaled down, and US companies have been discouraged from doing business here.
These sanctions have no doubt affected the lives of our people across the board. A number of industries have closed. As you're aware, unemployment has gone up. But we are saying that we're a sovereign state and we cannot be dictated to by anybody. It must be understood by the Trump administration that there was no justification in the first place for the USA to impose the sanctions over a bilateral historical issue between Zimbabwe and Britain.
The latest development is a blow to President Emmerson Mnangagwa's government, which had enjoyed support from several African leaders, including South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa, who have called for the removal of the embargoes to allow Zimbabwe to embark on full economic recovery. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Senegal's Constitutional Commission has confirmed the re-election of Macky Sall as the president of the country. Macky Sall garnered 58.26% of the vote cast in the February poll. His rivals, Idrissa Seck and Ousmane Sonko, came second and third, respectively. The Senegalese president was tipped to win comfortably without a runoff vote. In his first public address since his re-election, he promised to improve living standards and dialogue with opposition candidates.
You Senegalese have thus made the choice of continuity for the implementation of the emerging Senegal plan in peace and stability.
South Africa is edging closer to its national elections on the 8th of May. The ruling party is hoping to maintain its majority, while existing opposition parties and new entrants vie for voters' ballots in the hope of winning seats in the National Assembly.
While there are a large number of new parties contesting the May elections, it's about the three key parties who will likely account for about 87% of the total votes.
We have the ANC on 54.7%, the DA on 21.8% and the EFF on 12.2%. That's slightly down from December for the ANC. It's dropped from 56%. Slightly up for the DA. It's up 3 points from when it was in December, and slightly up for the EFF as well.
The country's Electoral Commission has its hands full, trying to verify over 1 million voters' residential addresses. But those who are registered are keen to make their mark.
I'm going to vote because I feel that every little vote counts and it makes a difference. And that's my way of saying I have the right to have an opinion on our country, you know, economy-wise, with any relation. So I feel that my vote gives me the right to express who I'd like to be making those kind of decisions for us, yeah.
Voters' turnout polls are currently pegged at 71%, implying that 29% of the registered voting population will not be voting.
On those numbers, the ANC increases slightly to 55%, the DA increases to 24%. So it would seem that a lower turnout seems to benefit the DA slightly more than the ANC.
Joseph's vote will definitely make a difference in the country's state, but right now, this is not the year, because I don't care about it.
The battle that everyone's going to be watching is for that 10% of alienated ANC voters. That fight's going to be between the ANC and the EFF. The DA doesn't feature here. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
We are going to a break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including UN warns Cameroon could descend further into violence. And intercommunal clashes trigger unprecedented displacement in Burkina Faso.
For lucrative economic data out of the country,
with a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed, and this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
The United Nations Human Rights Chief has warned that Cameroon may descend further into violence. Long-running tensions have erupted into conflicts in the country. Separatists in the southwest and Islamists in the northwest have prompted a crackdown by security forces. At least 1.3 million people are in need of aid. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, is urging Cameroon to protect its civilians.
I'm also concerned by alarming instances of hate speech, including by political leaders, as well as serious restrictions on the political space with prosecutions in a military court of a number of members of opposition parties. It is essential that steps be taken now to de-escalate the increasing crisis in the country and prevent a further descent into violence.
Well, the unrest has already led to mass displacement and worsening food insecurity. According to the United Nations, about 500,000 internally displaced people reside in Cameroon's north and southwest regions. Some of the refugees come from Nigeria and the Central African Republic. Refugees are calling on the government to look into the crisis. Meanwhile, thousands of refugees have been sent back to Nigeria after fleeing across the border after militants attacked the town of Ran.
We are homeless and we really suffered. It is not easy in our family, so we really ask government to look into our problem.
De plus en plus, vous savez, nous sommes dans une...
We are in a French-speaking area here, but increasingly my team and I are learning English because every day there are more of them coming here and we are doing our best to give them the care they need, but also psychological support.
Mais également le reconfort psychologique.
To Burkina Faso now, where the country is facing unprecedented displacement, triggered by armed groups and intercommunal clashes. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, more than 100,000 people have been uprooted from their homes, 70,000 of them in the past 2 months alone. Here's CGTN's Noel Wakugu with the details.
The United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says 1.2 million people in Burkina Faso have been in dire need of assistance as of February this year. Many of them lack access to food, water and proper sanitation. OCHA's spokesperson says Burkina Faso's Sahel, North, North Centre and Eastern regions are the most affected areas. As a result, in December, the government declared a state of emergency in 14 provinces.
So it is intercommunal clashes between communities, and laid over that is this emergence of armed groups, which are fighting each other, fighting government forces and attacking civilians. That has escalated in the second half of last year, and really it took off at the beginning of this year with some very violent clashes in the beginning of January.
The humanitarian alert coincides with a visit to the landlocked West African country by the UN Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator, Ulsa Mula. Ulsa insists that more must be done to meet the growing needs.
Around 120,000 people have no access to medical care. and some 670,000 people are at risk of food insecurity. 130,000 people are threatened by severe acute malnutrition this year, and their schools have closed, depriving almost 150,000 people, children, of their education.
This week, the UN Central Emergency Response Fund allocated $4 million to boost urgent assistance to internally displaced persons, people in host communities, and provide services for more than 15,000 women and girls. Noel Makugu, CGTN.
The Congolese Health Ministry says it's working closely with communities and international partners to contain the spread of Ebola in affected areas. This follows last week's attack on a treatment centre in the east. 4 patients are now missing. CGTN's Chris Okamringa has more.
The attack on an Ebola treatment center in the eastern city of Butembo last Wednesday led to the suspension of operations by medical aid group Doctors Without Borders. Unidentified gunmen are said to have carried out the attack. 4 patients fled the center, raising fears of the spread of the highly infectious disease. And while the Ministry of Health says 3 have been found and returned to treatment, 1 Ebola patient is still unaccounted for. Congolese authorities are now working closely with community leaders and international health workers to contain the situation.
Il faut savoir que à la suite de ces attaques,
the treatment centre that was attacked is now being run by workers from UNICEF and the Health Ministry after Doctors Without Borders suspended operations.
More than 500 people have died from Ebola since the start of August last year. Most of the cases have been recorded in the towns of Katwa and Butembo. The eastern city is due to hold elections on the 31st of March.
We have created a team that's working with the Electoral Commission to ensure that the polls go well.
Health workers are grappling with the mistrust of some community members who have resisted the response effort. Some believe the epidemic was spread in their community by government officials and the World Health Organizations to make money from the experimental vaccines. Others think it was brought about to deny them an opportunity to vote, with polls being suspended last year. The Ebola outbreak in the DRC is the second biggest after the West African one of 2014. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
The Africa Centre for Disease Control says the recent news that a man in London appears to have been cured of the HIV virus gives them hope that the disease could eventually be eradicated. But the medical body is warning that this should not distract the continent from continuing with HIV prevention and treatment programmes. CGTN's Coletta Wanjoy reports now from Addis Ababa.
Over a decade ago, Timothy Ray Brown, known as the Berlin patient, was declared HIV-free after a cell transplant in Germany. Now, doctors in London say an unidentified man has been declared free of the disease after a bone marrow transplant. The African Centre for Disease Control says they are encouraged by the news that the disease may be curable, but much more research is needed.
Well, at the program level, this is not the time to talk about it because, one thing, those donors are very rare. You cannot get the donors, and bone marrow transplantation is a very risky, complicated and painful procedure. So we cannot discuss this as at a public health point of intervention.
Dr. Kebede says that Africa should stay focused on proven measures of fighting HIV/AIDS.
There will be some solitary reports here and there claiming that HIV has been cured, but that should not distract, countries to implement proven measures of HIV prevention, which is, preventing HIV, empowering women and girls, and increasing access to antiretroviral treatment.
Statistics from the World Health Organization show there are over 25 million people living with HIV in Africa. The African Union says many countries are successfully fighting the disease and have reached a stage where the epidemic is under control, with fewer new infections than the people living with HIV. UNAIDS maintains that the focus now should be on reducing new HIV infections and offering more flexible treatment options.
When I joined UNAIDS, and I want to share that, we were giving 18 pills a day to a sick person. We would have never, I said, reached 22 million people on treatment if we were not working with private sector to change completely the dynamic and to make sure that today we will be giving them only 1 pill a day. And soon it will be 1 injection every 4 months.
The new HIV cure may not be the magic bullet the continent has been waiting for, but it does raise much-needed hope. Colette Anjoy, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
To North Africa now. Last December, the League of Arab States said that it could look into reinstating Syria's membership in 2019. On Wednesday, Arab foreign ministers held their first meeting this year to discuss regional files. However, Syria's membership was not discussed or voted upon. Here's Adel El-Mahrouhi with more.
Arab foreign ministers have gathered in Cairo for their first regular meeting this year. Among the postponed topics from 2018 was a discussion on Syria's membership. Since the war broke in Syria, this pan-Arab organization has frozen its membership in 2011, leaving its seat empty for years.
The bloodshed and waste of resources in the region is no longer accepted. It is time for serious negotiations that lead to a political solution in Syria, one which satisfies the legitimate demands of the Syrian people to restore the state's institutions, to enable to fight terrorism and bring back Syria to historic positions and roles in the region and among other Arab brothers.
The Arab League has not yet put the reinstatement of Syria's seat to a vote among its member states. Few days before this meeting, Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister Adel Al-Jubeir said it is still too early to restore ties with Damascus. With that recent announcement, experts doubt that Syria's empty seat here would soon be occupied with a representative.
There are movements among the League's members to bring back Syria. Iraq was quite vocal in this meeting, clearly asking to bring Syria's membership in the Arab League, and so did Algeria. Tunisia seems to be using its good ties to push for that. Saudi saying it's important, but it's not enough. The Arab League needs consensus amongst its members so that Syria may once again return.
Libya has also led the talks on Wednesday's meeting. Arabs say they support the UN's backed political solution. They all hope that after many delays, the general elections could finally take place this year. Meanwhile, the League Secretary General has urged member states to bring back their focus on the Palestinian crisis.
The regional crisis has taken the attention of Arabs from the most dangerous conflict there is, the Palestinian conflict. Every day passes, more pressure and further oppression is practiced against the Palestinian people. Unfortunately, these measures have stalled the peace process. Waiting for an American peace plan, we haven't seen anything from it except US escalations against the Palestinians.
The main purpose of this meeting has been to finalize the agenda of the Arab Summit. Later this month, Arab heads of states will hold their annual meeting in Tunisia. And the hopes of the Arab world will follow them, as people are still waiting to see this organization become more effective in resolving regional crises. Adel El-Mahrouhi, CGTN, Cairo.
A recap of our top stories now. The National Committee of China's top political advisory body, the CPPCC, held a press briefing on Wednesday where the focus was on what are being referred to as China's 3 tough battles. The central government identified financial risks, poverty alleviation and environmental pollution as the biggest challenges. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said fighting the 3 tough battles is one of the key tasks this year in his government work report. Thousands of passengers were stranded in Kenya on Wednesday after a strike by aviation workers at the main Nairobi airport, which led to the cancellation and delay of scores of flights and the use of riot police to break up the industrial action. By the end of the day, however, most scheduled arrivals had been processed while the departures backlog was being cleared. State-run airports operator KAA said the strike was sparked by a plan to hand over management of the profitable airport, the largest in the country, to the loss-making national carrier. Zimbabwe described the decision by US President Donald Trump to extend sanctions by another year as despicable, contemptible, and a travesty of justice. Harare, however, says, though regrettable, it would keep talking to Washington and the European Union to remove the measures it says have stifled its economy. The United Nations Human Rights Chief has warned that Cameroon may descend further into violence. Long-running tensions have erupted into conflicts in the country. Separatists in the southwest and Islamists in the northwest have prompted a crackdown by security forces. At least 1.3 million people are in need of aid. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, is urging Cameroon to protect its civilians. And those are the top stories that we're covering for you. Well, let's now go to Rama. He has all the business news for us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Here's what's coming up in business. Zimbabwe opens up fuel imports to private firms in order to end a supply crisis. And there's a new technical team set up to review Eskom's operations in South Africa. We'll review their work when we come back.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start in Zimbabwe, where the government over there has allowed major private companies to import fuel for their own use. That decision was arrived at in a cabinet meeting. Zimbabwe is looking for ways to end the crippling fuel supply crisis that has been caused primarily by a lack of hard dollar supply. Now, this move is by definition essentially designed to also essentially allow the Cabinet has also resolved, to fast-track the ongoing partial privatization of the Zimbabwe United Passenger Company. Individuals, however, will not be allowed to import any fuel under the terms of this new directive. Right then, some company results coming your way now. Let's head over to Kenya. The country's largest single bank by assets has reported a 16% rise in full-year earnings, up 16% to $339 million. KCB CFO says that the lender's net interest income rose marginally to about $488 million from $484 million the year before. Operating expenses dropped by about 4 percentage points to $350 million. Net loans and advances were up 6.4% to $4.5 billion. The Kenyan bank also operates in Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi and South Sudan. Total assets are up by over 9% to $7.1 billion. Customer deposits are up 8% to $5.4 billion. Now then, let's head over to South Africa. The Public Enterprises Ministry has appointed a new team to review the operations of its loss-making utility, Eskom. It's an 11-member team. It's scheduled to review all the operations right across the board for this utility over the next 4 weeks. Here's CGTN's Angela Coppola with more.
It follows a meeting recently where Gordhan and Mining Minister Gwede Mantashe met mining executives and large Eskom clients to plot a way forward. But not everyone thinks it's a good idea.
You now have the original task team that was established in December by the President and the Leader of Government Business. You then have a task team that the President established that's an inter-ministerial task team. You then have a task team that's established within Eskom and its board itself. And then you have 8 engineers that we've imported from Italy who are also here to do a certain something that we're not sure of. Now, no one wants to tell us exactly what they're doing. What we do know is this: everyone is operating in silos, if you'll pardon the pun, so they have their own boiler boiler rooms, and we don't know if they're reporting to the same head office.
The utility has been through a rough period, with load shedding being the order of the day, and consumers are bracing themselves for more bad news from the regulator.
The crisis is not being averted in any which way, shape or form, and the fact of the matter is there is a very good chance that on Thursday you and I are going to be paying a lot more for electricity while these task teams continue to operate in their silos with a shroud of secrecy over them.
As it stands, plans are being made to break the utility up into 3 units. Another option, though, has been put forward.
I would immediately start the separation of Eskom. I would split it into 2 separate entities. I would create a transmission entity where the South African public retain control of the grid, because I think it's a good national asset. And I would separate generation. The first thing I would do is I would start introducing independent power producers onto my generation. And as we moved along and as supply became more readily available, I would start selling off power stations to municipalities that had the ability to control those power stations and to run them effectively.
Eskom management has not been available for comment on progress being made to stabilise electricity supply since the first presidential task team was appointed in December.
The National Union of Mine Workers agrees that there are too many task teams and it's going to lead to confusion. They're calling it a recipe for disaster. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now let's focus on the tech firm Huawei. It's launched a new cybersecurity transparency centre in Brussels as part of efforts to reassure European regulators and clients. The latest move by the Chinese firm comes even as the company faces a wave of criticism from countries around the world over security concerns. Here's CGTN's Mariam Zaidi with more.
The doors have been opened to the media. Huawei's hope here is that this centre, just like others, say for example in Germany, with these big interactive screens, information can really demonstrate their commitment to privacy and security and to help set better global industry standard. It also acts as a bridge between governments, regulators and, well, if you're in Brussels, EU officials. Meanwhile, the US accuses Huawei of allowing their equipment to be used for Chinese government-sanctioned surveillance. And the US government has banned their products and involvement in 5G networks. Now, it's a better story for Huawei in Europe. Just last month, Germany, for example, announced auctioning for the country's 5G network is expected to begin in March, and Huawei wouldn't be banned. But some European operators are, of course, turning their backs on Huawei. Vodafone, BT, Deutsche Telekom, they're just a few of the examples. So can Huawei rebuild trust while they're putting a lot of money and effort into projects like this one in Brussels to do just that? Mariam Zaidi, CGTN, Brussels.
The European Union, in the meantime, is preparing for a working weekend, as officials say they do not expect a breakthrough in talks on Brexit before then. Talks between the UK and the EU resumed on the 6th of March, coming right after the previous day's futile, going by the outcome. 3-hour meeting led by Theresa May's chief lawyer. In the meantime, reports do say that the Prime Minister will be offering Parliament a greater say over changes to workers' rights post-Brexit. That proposal by the Prime Minister is seen as directly targeting opposition lawmakers. Mrs May is seeking approval over a repackaged exit deal at a vote next week on the 12th of March. She said in a statement that after Brexit, it should be for Parliament to decide what rules are most appropriate, as opposed to automatically accepting changes from Brussels. The former chairman of Nissan, Carlos Ghosn, has been released from jail earlier today. The heavily disguised industry figure slipped out of a detention center in Tokyo after posting bail of $9 million. Mr. Ghosn, remember, spent about 100 days in detention over financial misconduct charges. In a statement released on the 5th of March, Ghosn said that he would fight what he said was Japan's meritless accusation. His arrest has muddied the outlook, though, for the Nissan-Renault-Mitsubishi alliance, which he crafted and headed. But Nissan's current CEO says that Ghosn's arrest will have no impact whatsoever on the alliance.
Yes, I've heard about Carlos Ghosn's bail being granted. It's a judicial process, so it could happen. It is not me who decides whether he is guilty or innocent. And I don't think the case will affect the business or the Nissan-Renault-Mitsubishi alliance.
Electric cars are firmly in the limelight at the Geneva International Motor Show, which opens to the public on the 7th of March. Car makers at the exhibition say they would like to see a lot more support for charging stations and other support infrastructure for EVs. CGTN's Timothy Aldrich was there.
Electric cars are taking center stage at the Geneva Motor Show that runs through March 17th.
From luxury car maker Aston Martin to mass producer BMW, many car makers now offer electric models. They believe it's an enjoyable experience to charge their vehicles overnight, having a fully charged car in the morning and not having to go to the gas station.
Electrification is a key part of our strategy, and they provide a perfect case in Europe in particular, because we serve customers there with plug-in hybrids that actually want to have the ability to drive with zero local emissions, for example in cities in pure electric mode, but then also have the ease of mind to drive longer distances, for example during the weekend, without having to recharge.
When it comes to long distance travel on the highways, there are certainly efforts to be made. Companies are investing in the creation of an adequate charging network over the next several years. Some car producers are urging governments and administrations to provide better infrastructure for electric cars.
Well, definitely the politicians, the towns have to support is making charging within the town for people who live in the town accessible. Definitely is an area where we would love to see more activity.
Well, I think that charging facilities and the infrastructure are one of those elements. So we also call upon governments, local governments, EU at large, not to only put standards in, but also help in developing the infrastructure that is necessary to meet those standards.
Securing the electric market has become increasingly important for car makers as demand for traditional combustion engine vehicles slows in China and Europe. That comes as governments in Europe and China are enforcing tougher emissions rules. Meanwhile, prices are falling for batteries. The electric cars under the lights at the Geneva Motor Show may increase the likelihood that larger numbers of battery-powered cars will be on the roads in the next several years. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
Right, they'll leave you there for the time being. Here's what's coming up at the top of the hour, though. A strike over a labour dispute that essentially disrupted flights at JKIA, aside from Bulletin International in Addis. It's the biggest airport in the region. So what happens next? We'll have some answers for you right here at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, though, back to Karen.
Thank you very much, Rama. Well, we are going to a short break. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including... We look at how the Confucius Institute in Nigeria is helping to promote cultural exchanges between China and Nigeria.
Join us in Global Business. See Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
It's been 10 years now since the first Confucius Institute in Nigeria opened at the University of Lagos. A lot of Nigerian students have benefited from the institution's programs. As part of the cultural exchange, the institute recently hosted a celebration of the Spring and Lantern Festivals, which it does every year. As CGTN's Deji Badmus reports, the event provided an opportunity to introduce some of the Nigerian students who have tasted the Chinese culture and language.
It's the first Confucius Institute to be set up in Nigeria to help promote cultural exchanges between China and Africa's most populous country. And from 2009 to date, the Confucius Institute of the University of Lagos has more than delivered on its mission of helping Nigerians learn the Chinese language and culture, and even much more. Every year, it gathers guests at the auditorium of the university to mark the Spring and Lantern Festivals, two significant festivals in the Chinese culture. It's no different this year.
We are delighted to say that we can see our products. The Institute has been able to help Nigerians and the neighboring countries learn Chinese language and culture. We have affected up to 10,000 people in our teaching of Chinese language and culture at the Institute, and still teaching more.
And here are some of the products of the Institute on display. Virtually all the Nigerians performing here learnt everything at the Confucius Institute. It's the clearest demonstration of the far-reaching impact the Confucius Institute is making here, and the organizers are happy to flaunt it.
We are having more events like the Chinese Bridge competition, the Chinese Month, the Chinese Culture Month, and we are having a lot of other Chinese traditional or contemporary festivals so that our students can learn the Chinese language, the Chinese culture better. We teach not only the Chinese language, but also Tai Chi, the martial arts, Chinese dancing, and Chinese cooking.
This combined Tai Chi and poetry reading performance of both Nigerians and the Chinese is a clear testament to the synergy and cross-cultural ties the Institute is helping to build in Nigeria. And that's not all. Check out this performance by officials of the Nigerian Navy performing the Chinese song, Sweet Honey. It was indeed a colorful celebration, featuring so many side attractions, the highlight being this joint rendition by staff of the Institute. Dejibadmo, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
To Morocco now, and a Moroccan mountaineer has become the first female in the country to scale the 7 summits of the world's continents. She hopes to inspire girls to conquer their fears and achieve their dreams. Ciao Ngono has more.
I am really very proud and very happy to be able to achieve this great challenge and to become the first person in Morocco to achieve this challenge of the 7 summits of the world.
At the age of 26, Boukra Baibano climbed the highest peak in Morocco, Toubkal. Since then, she had traveled the globe to climb each of the continent's highest mountains, conquering the 4,897 meters. Her determination has seen her reach the summit of Antarctica's Mount Vinson.
With will, with a lot of perseverance, one can even achieve dreams as big as to climb Everest and to achieve a challenge like climbing the 7 summits of the world.
She continues to support the fight on violence against women and girls.
I don't identify as feminist. I think of myself as a person more than a woman. I am a normal person who managed to seize her chance, who worked on herself to make something of herself, to realize her dreams.
Her mountaineering passion has required a lot of financial support.
The key figures of this great adventure of the 7 summits for 8 years from 2011 until the end of 2018 are about 43,000 vertical meters climbed and about 2 million dirhams spent on the project.
Boukra Baibano hopes to inspire women to believe in themselves.
I hope to be a role model, especially for young girls, so that they too dare to make something of themselves, to believe in themselves, to believe in a dream.
As well as doing community work, Baibano gives talks in schools and universities around the country. She's also campaigning to develop mountain tourism in Morocco. Chom Hono, CGTN.
After the break, all the sports news, including Manchester United legend Ryan Giggs in South Africa for UEFA Champions League Trophy Tour.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken,
legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way.
Match Point, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Manchester United legend